It was late October of 2021, deep in the forest near the Washington-Oregon border. The kind of place where trees grow so thick they swallow the sunlight and the fog rolls in low like a living thing. Locals call this area Devil's Ridge, a stretch of wilderness where hunters often report strange sounds and massive, unexplainable footprints pressed deep into the mud. Three friends, Jake, Marcus, and Tyler, were out there for a weekend deer hunting trip. All were experienced outdoorsmen, and none of them believed in Bigfoot, at least not yet. They set up their camp about 2 miles off an old logging road. The place was quiet, too quiet, no birds, no squirrels. Just the wind whistling through the towering fir trees. Jake had just bought a new high-end trail camera. The kind hunters strapped to trees to watch for game. "Let's see what walks through here tonight," he joked, mounting it about 8 feet up on a tree, facing a narrow animal trail behind their camp. The camera had night vision and was set to record short video clips whenever it sensed motion. They didn't expect anything more exciting than a raccoon. That night, around 2:30 a.m., something triggered the camera. Back at the camp, the fire had burned low. The three men were asleep in their tents when a long, deep howl echoed through the forest. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a coyote. It was something bigger. Marcus later said it sounded almost human, but deeper, like a roar mixed with a scream. Jake sat bolt upright in his tent, listening. The woods had gone completely silent. Then came a sound that was even worse. Heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Something large was moving just beyond their firelight. Tyler whispered from his tent, "You hear that?" Jake whispered back, "Yeah, stay in the tent." The footsteps circled their camp once. They could hear branches snapping under what sounded like serious weight. Then it stopped. For nearly 10 minutes, everything was still. Finally, whatever it was drifted back into the forest. None of them slept for the rest of the night. When morning came, they tried to convince themselves it was just a bear. That is, until Jake checked the trail camera. He pulled out the SD card and slid it into his phone. At first, it just showed normal footage from the evening, a deer, a raccoon. Then, the timestamp rolled over to 2:13 a.m. Jake pressed play. The camera showed the empty trail illuminated in ghostly green night vision. Then something stepped into the frame. Jake froze. The thing that walked across that trail was massive. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark hair that hung in long strands. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, far wider than any human's, but what truly shook them was the way it moved. Not like a bear, not like any animal they knew. It walked upright, with slow, confident steps, like it owned the forest. The creature paused directly in front of the camera. For 2 seconds, it looked straight into the lens. Its eyes reflected a bright white in the infrared light, and its face, it looked almost human. A heavy brow ridge, a wide flat nose, and a mouth slightly open, showing large teeth. Then, something chilling happened. The creature leaned closer, almost as if it knew it was being watched. It sniffed the air, then made a deep rumbling sound in its chest. The camera's microphone barely caught it, but the audio meter spiked, a low growl. After that, the creature stepped off the trail and vanished into the woods. The entire video lasted only 11 seconds. The three men stood there in stunned silence. Marcus finally broke it. "That's not a bear." Tyler just shook his head slowly. "That thing." It looked right at the camera. They went back to the trail where the camera had been. That's when they found the footprints. They were huge, 17 inches long, pressed deep into the damp soil. The stride between them was over 5 feet. No animal native to North America leaves tracks like that. But the strangest discovery was still ahead. About 30 yards away, they found a large tree where the bark had been stripped off nearly 8 feet high. Long claw marks ran down the trunk, and wedged into the bark was a thick strand of coarse black hair. Jake carefully placed it in a plastic bag. When they got home, they uploaded the footage online. At first, people called it a hoax. But then wildlife experts started to study the video. They noticed the creature's walk, its arm swing, its body proportions. They didn't match a person in a suit. The shoulders moved differently. The muscles under the fur shifted naturally as it walked. One biologist pointed out that the stride length and estimated weight distribution suggested a creature weighing close to 700 pounds. To this day, the video remains unexplained. The three men never went back to Devil's Ridge, but the trail camera still sits in Jake's garage. And every once in a while, when they replay the footage, they notice something new. Right before the creature walks off camera, it turns its head slightly toward the woods as if it heard something. Something else moving in the dark. Which leaves one terrifying possibility lingering. The thing they caught on camera might not have been alone.
It was late September in the deep wilderness of the Olympic National Forest in Washington state. The summer crowds had all but vanished, leaving miles of rain-soaked trails empty and completely silent. For Park Rangers Daniel Mercer and Luis Ortega, it was supposed to be just another overnight patrol, something they had done dozens of times before. But this night would be different. The radio crackled to life inside Ranger Mercer's truck as they drove slowly along an old service road, winding through towering spruce and ancient cedar trees. Dispatched to Ranger Unit 3? We've received a strange report from a group of campers near the North Fork trailhead. Possible animal disturbance. They claim something large is circling their campsite. Mercer glanced over at Ortega and smirked. Probably just a black bear, he said, grabbing the radio handset. Unit 3 responding. They had heard it all before panicked campers convinced that raccoons were monsters in the dark. Still, it was their job to check it out. The road eventually ended at a small clearing where two visibly frightened campers stood beside a dying fire. Their faces were pale in the flickering light. "You the Rangers?" One of them asked quickly, his voice shaky. Mercer nodded. "You're the folks who reported an animal?" The older camper shook his head slowly, his eyes wide. "It ain't a bear." Ortega crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "What makes you say that?" The younger camper pointed a trembling finger toward the dark tree line. "Because bears don't walk around camp on two legs." Mercer and Ortega exchanged a look. This was getting a little strange. "Did you actually see it?" Mercer asked, trying to keep his tone professional. The older man swallowed hard. "Yeah, about 10 minutes ago. It stepped right out of those trees. It must have been 8 feet tall, hair all over it. Shoulders like a dam bull." Mercer immediately tried to rationalize it. "Probably just a large elk you saw in the dark," he said calmly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. But before the campers could protest, a sound rolled through the forest that froze everyone in their tracks. THUD, 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 heavy footsteps. Not running, walking, slow, deliberate. Every head turned toward the black wall of trees. Ortega grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and aimed its powerful beam toward the woods. "Hello?" he shouted. "Park Rangers." The footsteps stopped. For several agonizing seconds, the forest went completely silent. And then, something massive stepped just inside the edge of the light. At first, Mercer thought it was just a strange tree stump. Then it moved. The creature stood partially hidden behind a massive cedar trunk, but its shape was unmistakable. A broad chest. Long, powerful arms hanging past its knees. Dark, reddish-brown hair covering its entire body. And its eyes? Large, reflective eyes staring directly into the light, unblinking. Ortega whispered, barely breathing, "What the hell?" The creature slowly leaned out from behind the tree, revealing more of its immense size. It was easily over 8 feet tall. Mercer's stomach dropped. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. And whatever it was, it looked furious. Suddenly, the creature let out a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. The campers screamed and scrambled toward the safety of the ranger truck. Mercer instinctively reached for his sidearm, but hesitated. What could a pistol do against that? The creature slammed one massive hand against the tree trunk. Crack. The sound echoed like a gunshot as the entire cedar shook violently. "Back to the truck," Ortega shouted, snapping Mercer out of his trance. They all ran, their boots pounding across the dirt. Behind them, the forest exploded with movement. Branches snapped like twigs. Heavy footsteps charged through the dense brush, getting closer. Mercer dove into the driver's seat and fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he started the engine. Ortega jumped into the passenger side. "Go!" Mercer slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck lurched forward just as something huge burst from the tree line right behind them. In the rearview mirror, Mercer saw it clearly for the first time. The creature was running upright, its long arms swinging, its powerful legs covering ground at an impossible speed. It chased them down the service road, its terrifying silhouette shrinking in the distance as they sped away, leaving the deep, dark woods and its secrets behind them.
The first thing we noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you expect in the mountains. The silence felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. My name's Caleb, and 3 years ago I joined a small tracking group that specialized in investigating strange wildlife reports in remote mountain regions. We weren't ghost hunters or thrill seekers. Most of us were hunters, trackers, and former search and rescue volunteers who knew the wilderness better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. But the call that brought us to those mountains was different. A small logging town had been reporting something large moving through the forests at night. Dogs refusing to go outside. Livestock found dead. And one man swore something had walked straight across the road in front of his truck, something taller than the hood. 7 feet tall, covered in hair. The locals didn't want to say the word. Bigfoot. Normally we would have laughed it off. But the thing that got our attention were the footprints. 20-inch tracks. Deep impressions. Spread across muddy logging roads where nothing that size should have been walking. So 4 of us packed gear and headed into the mountains. The area was steep and thick with pine and cedar. Fog hung low between the ridges, and the deeper we went, the darker the forest felt. Our team leader, Marcus, was the best tracker I'd ever seen. Former Army scout. Quiet guy, but he could read the ground like a book. It didn't take him long to find the first sign. He crouched down along a muddy creek bank and waved us over. Look at this. At first I thought it was a bear track. Then I saw the toes. 5 of them. Spread wide. The heel was massive, and the stride between prints was nearly 5 feet. Marcus measured it with a tape. 19 inches, he said quietly. Nobody laughed. Because whatever made that track, it was walking upright. We followed the prints along the creek for nearly an hour. The strange thing was how deliberate they were. Whoever or whatever was moving through the mountains knew exactly where it was going. The tracks avoided rocky ground. They stayed close to soft soil where the prints would sink deep. Almost like it didn't care if we followed. That thought made my stomach tighten. The woods around us were growing darker as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Wind whispered through the pines, and every now and then we'd hear a distant knock echo through the forest. Knock, knock. Marcus froze when he heard it. Tree knock, he whispered. Some researchers claim Bigfoot communicate by hitting trees with sticks. 2 knocks answered back from farther up the ridge. Knock, knock. And then everything went quiet again. We decided to set camp near a small clearing before it got completely dark. The forest there was thick, but the clearing gave us a good view in all directions. We built a small fire, ate quickly, and started reviewing the trail map. That's when we heard it, a deep howl, not a wolf, not a coyote. It sounded almost human, but deeper, longer, the kind of sound that makes every instinct in your body scream danger. The howl rolled down the mountainside and echoed through the valley. Then another answered. From the ridge behind us, my buddy Aaron looked at Marcus. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Marcus stared into the darkness beyond the firelight. I don't think we're tracking it anymore. He paused. I think it's tracking us. Around midnight, the forest came alive. Branches snapping. Heavy footsteps moving through the trees, slow, deliberate. Something big was circling the clearing. We all grabbed our rifles and stood back to back near the fire. The footsteps stopped just beyond the tree line. Then came the smell. Rotten meat mixed with wet animal fur. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Aaron whispered, Bear? Marcus shook his head. Too tall. We all saw it at the same moment. A massive shape moved between the trees. At first, it looked like a shadow, until it stepped into the faint glow of the fire. And my blood ran cold. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark matted hair. Its shoulders were wider than a refrigerator, and its arms hung almost to its knees. But the worst part was its eyes. They reflected the firelight like amber glass. And they were staring straight at us. Nobody moved. The creature stood there just beyond the firelight, watching, studying. It tilted its head slowly, almost curious. Then it took one step closer. The ground shook under its weight. Marcus raised his rifle but didn't fire. "I don't think that's the only one," he whispered, and right then we heard it. Movement behind us. Another heavy step, then another. We turned and saw shapes moving through the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. 2 more. Maybe 3, big, hairy, silent. We were surrounded. One of them let out a deep growl. Not loud, but powerful enough to vibrate in your chest. The one in front of us suddenly slammed a tree with its fist. Crack. The sound echoed through the mountains. And that's when Marcus shouted the words I'll never forget. "Back to the ridge! Now!" We grabbed our gear and ran. Branches whipped across our faces as we scrambled uphill through the darkness. Behind us we could hear them crashing through the forest. Heavy, fast, far faster than something that size should move. One of them screamed a high, terrifying shriek that sounded almost human. I risked one look back, and I wish I hadn't, because one of them was only 30 yards behind us, charging on 2 legs. We didn't stop running until we reached the rocky ridge where the trees thinned out. Suddenly the forest behind us went quiet. No footsteps. No growls. Nothing. We stood there gasping for breath, staring back down the slope. Marcus slowly lowered his rifle. "They won't leave the trees," he said. We watched the forest for nearly 10 minutes. Then, one massive figure stepped out from the shadows below. It stood at the edge of the tree line. Moonlight hid its face. And I'll never forget the expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was a warning. Like we had crossed into a place we were never meant to go. The creature let out one last deep howl that echoed across the mountains. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest. We packed up and left before sunrise. None of us spoke much on the drive back to town. And none of us ever went back to that mountain. But sometimes late at night I think about those tracks, those howls, and those glowing eyes watching us from the dark. Because the truth is, we never found the end of that trail. And whatever lives in those mountains is still out there,